Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Casper. In this video, I wanted to do the astrology of Adolf Hitler. um, I feel like his chart is really fascinating. I don't know Hitler that well. I'm not an expert, but there are some things about him that really stand out in his chart that I think is incredibly fascinating and is so interesting. And I think the reason why I thought about him is because Hitler is a Taurus. His sun is at 0 degrees of Taurus. And um, he has this crazy Jupiter in Capricorn. And it's just interesting because I just made a video about Jupiter entering Taurus, and how Jupiter doesn't do so well in Taurus. And then it made me think of Hitler because Hitler has his sun in Taurus and Jupiter doesn't do well in Capricorn. So I just feel like, okay, well, I guess I'll talk about Hitler. So let's talk about this part right here because I think this is incredibly fascinating, right? So again, Jupiter is the planet of expansion, growth. It's a very big planet. It's almost like a balloon in many ways. Like it inflates everything. So so Jupiter, you know, if it's the planet of inflation, it doesn't do well in Earth signs because Earth signs like to contain. They like results. They're very constrictive in many ways, especially Capricorn, right? Because Capricorn um, uh, is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is the planet of restriction and limitation. It's almost like the opposite of Jupiter in many ways, right? So if Jupiter inflates, Saturn deflates, and you know, Capricorn is the sign of structure and order and authority and discipline. And I think it's incredibly fascinating because I was listening to Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson was just like, Hitler is high in openness and also very sensitive to disgust, right? He's very conscientious. And I think you can really see that with the Jupiter and Capricorn placement because it's so contradictory, right? Because Jupiter wants to expand, but Capricorn likes discipline and control, right? So it's like, how do you expand and grow in a constrictive sign? Like you don't. So what happens? It's like the balloon implodes. It doesn't explode. It implodes. It's like it's like feeling claustrophobic. It's like right, especially because Jupiter is higher beliefs and ideals and you know philosophy in many ways. And again, Jupiter is debilitated in Capricorn, not only for what I said about how Capricorn is limiting, but also because you know, um, it's hard to have higher minded beliefs, right? Like, I think it's so funny because, what does, Hitler hated the Jews, right? He started mass genocide. He was incredibly racist and he started this higher minded belief, but it's very distorted and inverted and gross. Like all of the good traits of Jupiter, where you're supposed to be philosophical and to have a higher belief, is been corrupted by the Capricorn sign. Now, I'm not saying Capricorn is bad. I'm not saying if you have Jupiter in Capricorn, you're bad, but it's just very interesting how, right, Jupiter is debilitated. All of the good aspects of Jupiter have been inverted. So, like this strong, intense, higher belief has been converted into this very structured, very ordered, very sensitive to disgust, very highly conscientious, right? Very open, but at the same time, very constrictive at the same time, right? And you just see that in his character, right? Like Hitler would stand for 8 hours a day in a very rigid pose because his Jupiter, because he believed in order, he believed in structure. And this structured belief is intensified or more notable because his moon is conjunct Jupiter, right? So, right, because if Jupiter doesn't aspect any other important parts of your chart, right? If it doesn't aspect like your sun or your moon, if Jupiter is kind of just on to the side, then the person doesn't really have strong beliefs. But if your moon conjuncts Jupiter, or if it makes a trine to your sun, right? So like if you're a sun in Taurus, you're already someone who likes to do things in a very like specific way. You don't like to change. You like things to be very ordered. And then you see this sun in Taurus making a trine to Jupiter in Capricorn. So it's like this person also really wants to be even more structured and even more orderly. And then this moon in Capricorn, right? So the moon represents our emotions, what we feel on a day-to-day basis. Moon in Capricorn people have a very strong desire for power. They're very orderly and authority driven, right? Because that's what Capricorn is. But they also, moon is also debilitated in Capricorn, which is so, well, it's in an antithesis in Capricorn. It's not debilitated in Capricorn, but it's in its opposite sign, right? So like moon loves to be in Cancer because Cancer is the sign of emotion and flowing with things and really feeling your emotions. But Capricorn is like, I don't feel emotions. I get stuff done. I like to work hard. I like to build something. I don't want to play like these silly childish games and express myself. I want to get stuff done. So if your moon, if like your emotional self is in Capricorn, like you don't really feel anything. Like I'm not trying to, just say like, oh, see, Hitler is a psychopath. He has his moon in Capricorn. I'm not saying like people who have moon in Capricorn are psychopaths. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying these two planets, which are very open and higher minded, are being constricted and inverted in Capricorn. And it's so interesting to see that, right? So, right, because Jupiter and the moon as a conjunction on its own is, right, this is someone who has very strong beliefs. They feel things very deeply. They have very strong opinions about things. They probably have an ideology. But if it's in Capricorn, well, it's probably not going to be a very good belief system. It's probably going to be very rigid. It's probably going to be overly structured. It's probably going to be kind of crazy, right? And what I think is very interesting is that it's in the fourth house. And the fourth house is the house of home. It's the house of land and like owning land. It's also the deepest parts of ourselves. It's like our roots. So it is interesting because like Nazism is about like the fatherland. It's about getting back to like the true blood. And this is like based on the whole sign house system, right? So in the whole sign house system, this Jupiter moon conjunction belief system that Jupiter has is very much based around the country and the fatherland. But you could also say, right, and oops, I didn't mean to do that. You could also say that, right, so if we switch the house system to Placidus, which is what a lot of astrologers use, this would put the conjunction in the third house. And the third house is the house of communication. It's the house of, it's kind of like the house of like, what's going on? How's everyone doing? What's the gossip lately, right? So like the third house, people who have strong placements in the third house, they tend to know a lot of what's going on. They tend to know what other people are thinking. They tend to be really good journalists and speakers. And so it's also the house of Mercury, right? Like Mercury is the journalist, it's the messenger, right? And then Jupiter is like the higher minded thinking. So kind of how like Saturn deflates and Jupiter inflates, Mercury communicates while Jupiter is higher minded thinking. It's the philosopher. So like Mercury is like trivial gossip and Jupiter is like, let's talk about the meaning of life. And so, but it's interesting in the third house because it's like, let's talk about my beliefs by like reporting them, right? And so it is interesting. Like it makes me wonder if like should astrologers use the whole sign house system or the Placidus house system? And honestly, I honestly think that maybe we should use both, because I really do see this conjunction of Jupiter and the moon aligning perfectly in the third house, because the third house is about speeches and talking and communicating. And if you have Jupiter here, then there's like this booming voice. And then if the moon is there, then that means there's like this booming ideology. This is someone who wants to report what they have to say. This is someone who, especially like what made Hitler so popular is the fact that he was able to kind of feel what other people are feeling. He's able to understand the emotions of other people and integrate them into what he was saying, right? Like this third house kind of like, let me speak boldly about what everyone is thinking, that kind of idea. So it's incredibly fascinating. Like this conjunction right here in Capricorn explains Hitler on so many levels. It's amazing. And then that trine to his sun in Taurus is already pretty like wow. Um so anyway, let me go back to whole sign house system, just because Placidus it doesn't look very structured. It's kind of out of whack for me. Is it displayed? Jesus, what was it? Wheels, calcs. Yeah. Okay, so what's also interesting is that Hitler had Mars and Venus conjunction. So, and in Taurus again. So, he was an artist before he started this whole like ideology and writing Mein Kampf in jail. Right, especially like if you have planets in the third house, you tend to write books, or especially if it's Jupiter and the moon, then you're gonna write about what you believe. But he used to be an artist, and Mars Venus is very great for art. I would almost say sculpture or working with your hands, because Mars is very passionate and very active, and Venus is arts and aesthetics. And Hitler was a painter, and that makes a lot of sense because he has this exact conjunction of Venus and Mars, which is very typical of artists, because they want, right? Because if Venus is aesthetics and Mars is action, then you're gonna want to act out beauty, right? You're gonna want to make something. You're gonna want to act out something beautiful. I actually think that Hitler would have done very well maybe as a sculptor. He should have tried sculpture or something. Maybe even a blacksmith or something. Like, I mean, that sounds kind of outdated, but I imagine he would have done really well doing a job where he could work with his hands, and it would require a lot of intense effort. I feel like he would have done very well at that, right? Because again, he would stand for 8 hours at a time to show off like his discipline. And what's also interesting is that this conjunction in Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and as Saturn is kind of conjunct in Leo, so like again, like it's Leo is very bold, and you see more of this contradictory elements because Saturn doesn't really do so well in Leo. Saturn likes, Saturn would like to be in Capricorn, which is very structured and orderly. And Jupiter would probably want to be in Leo, right? So it's like Hitler is kind of backwards in many ways. But like, Saturn in Leo is like, this is someone who wants to show off how structured they are. Like, look how orderly I am. Look how in control I am. This is also someone who, probably really struggles a lot with leadership, right? Because Saturn and Leo, right? If Leo is how we are leaders and how we express ourselves, right? It can show someone who expresses themselves in a very like authority driven way. Like, I'm going to express myself. I'm in a very controlled way or something like that, which, again, Hitler was an authoritarian. I mean, that just makes a lot of sense. Like Saturn and Leo almost conjunct the MC. Like, oh yeah, that would be an authoritarian. It's also interesting because you see this square right here, right? Like Mars and Venus points to someone who is very creative and can make art, especially because Venus is domicile in Taurus. Um, Mars is actually debilitated in Taurus, or well, it's not debilitated. It just doesn't do very well in Taurus because, right, Mars is very like let's go, and Taurus is like let's take a step back and relax a little bit. But you see this square with Saturn, and like it really shows like it could have represented many other aspects in his life, but it shows like with his art he was rejected a lot because Saturn represents rejection. It represents limitation. It represents not getting what you want. Like the Saturn in the 11th house or in the 10th house in the MC, right? Depending on the house system you use, is kind of putting a damper on like his goals as an artist. Like maybe he really wanted to be an artist for a living, um, right? Like I think he did, but this Saturn was like rejecting him, and I think he would have been successful if he would have stuck with it. Obviously, right? Like if he would have, because Saturn wants you to put in the time, it wants you to put in effort, or Saturn is forcing you, you know, it's going to put an obstacle in your way, and you're going to have to find a way to resolve that issue. You're going to have to find a way um, to overcome it in some way, right? Saturn is about giving you struggles. So, I feel like the final thing with Hitler is that his ascendant is in Libra, which I think is really interesting. A lot of politicians have Libra ascendants or Scorpio ascendants, I think. But because Libra is the sign of politics. It's the sign of diplomacy. It's the lawyer sign. It's the sign of kind of like it's about the law. So if you have your ascendant in Libra, you tend to be this diplomatic, like someone who represents the people, of course. But of course, with Hitler, it's been totally like inverted, and he was elected. It's not like he seized power; he was elected to power. Although I don't really know Hitler that well. I don't know his biography that well, but so anyway, that's like the main things with Hitler that I thought were really interesting. And um uh anyway, thank you for listening.